So this morning's breaking news that the president of the United States had gone out on a limb and he had said that the United States would militarily defend Taiwan if Taiwan was invaded. This was what the president of the United States said in a press conference. And there are some good things about this and there's some bad things about this. The bad thing about this is that it is utterly unclear whether this is in fact the case. Here is Joe Biden saying it.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made. And my expectation is it will not happen. It will not be attempted.
So there you have it. Joe Biden saying that the commitment that we made is to defend Taiwan militarily. Now, the real commitment that we have is to give Taiwan the weaponry to defend itself militarily if China were to invade. On a strategic level, on a geostrategic level, it is not a bad thing for China to think that the United States might directly involve itself militarily if Taiwan were to be invaded. After all, Taiwan is significantly more strategically important than Ukraine is by any stretch of the imagination. It is not particularly close. Ukraine is not the source of a wild variety of really vital resources to the world. And they're responsible for some grain, but that grain can be made up in other places. Taiwan is responsible for nearly all advanced semiconductors on planet Earth at this point, which means that if China were to grab control of that, it would deprive the United States of pretty much all the advanced technology necessary to run an enormous number of our industries, as well as a lot of our military tech, because a lot of that stuff, those semiconductors are used in a lot of the machinery that we use in the military as well. So there's that problem. If China were to take Taiwan, there's the problem of China beginning to encircle Australia. There's the problem of China beginning to encircle Japan. There's essentially the fact that the United States would then have no real base of operations, would be increasingly pushed out to sea in terms of geostrategic military naval impact. And there's some real problems with China taking Taiwan. And the reality is that if China attempted to take Taiwan at this point in time, Taiwan could inflict significant casualties on the Chinese, but China would win. I mean, China is a much larger country. China does have a massive military. China might lose 50, 75, 100,000 soldiers, but they would still end up taking the island of Taiwan if they had to. And again, the proximity of China to Taiwan, I mean, they're separated only by the Taiwan Strait. That proximity means that our ability to resupply is extremely limited in that part of the world. So when Joe Biden says that we will militarily defend Taiwan, there are a couple ways to read that. One is good. This is us trying to scare the Chinese off the mark. It's us trying to say to the Chinese, listen, you should just know up front that if things get hot here, we will be there with our weaponry ready to fight you. That is the upside. The downside is it's not really true if that's the case. And it's not clear that that's the case. The United States has not made itself militarily ready for an actual battle over Taiwan with the Chinese. We don't have the resources in theater. We don't have the ability to resupply, as I say. We don't actually have the ability to fight and win a war for Taiwan at this point because we have depleted our military resources and we've particularly depleted our naval resources over the course of the last 20 years or so. This is a real problem. So you saw Joe Biden's team actually trying to walk this sucker back as soon as he said it, which is the third time in the last year that Joe Biden has suggested there will be military intervention directly by the United States. And his team has said, well, not so fast. Now, again, if you want to make this the new policy of the United States, I'm all for it. I actually am. I think that the United States does have a massive strategic interest in protecting the independence of Taiwan. I think that the kind of strategic ambiguity as to whether there is one China, including Taiwan, or whether Taiwan is an independent nation is incredibly stupid. Taiwan is an independent nation. It has its own independent government. It is not governed by the Chinese government, nor should it be. And the fact that the West was strategically ambiguous with regard to Hong Kong for 20 years means that Hong Kong is now subjected to Chinese tyranny, and they literally just walked in with no casualties and took over the place, and no one said boo. So either you draw a hard line or you don't draw a hard line. So on a geostrategic level, I'm very much in favor of the idea that the United States is going to stop China from invading Taiwan. On an actual practical level, can we do that? And are we making commitments that we're unable to fulfill? That is a serious problem. That is a real problem. And so when you have Joe Biden out front saying things that maybe we wish were true, but maybe we don't actually have the stones or the brass to back up, the problem is if Joe Biden says we will get ourselves involved militarily, that could also have one of two impacts. One is that it tells the Chinese, don't do it because the price is going to be too high. And even if you were to win Taiwan, you would then be in a state of war with the United States, and you really don't want that. Right? That is possibility number one. Possibility number two is that Xi looks at Biden and he says, I'm going to call your bluff. Right? You've now just ratcheted tensions up. I don't think you have the resources in theater to prevent us from actually taking Taiwan. I think you might have those resources in theater over the next couple of years if this is your new strategic proposal. And so I'm actually going to try to take Taiwan like ASAP. I'm going to try and go in there and take it before you can get more resources over there. So this is the problem with getting out over your skis the way that Joe Biden does. If you're going to announce a policy like this, it actually has to be a real policy change with the brass to back it up. And when I say the brass, I mean the military wherewithal to actually back up the plan. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Biden said the United States would respond militarily to defend Taiwan if China tries to take it by force, sparking uncertainty over whether the United States was moving away from its long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity and prompting a clarification from the White House. And again, this is what happens with Biden a lot, is you're never sure whether it's the dementia talking or an actual policy change. Is applesauce for brains actually saying something that is a real policy shift for the United States? Or is the night nurse team from the press comms corps going to have to come out and explain away what he was just trying to do? Biden's comments were met with anger from Beijing and praise from Taipei. They were also part of a pattern. In August and October of last year, the president answered questions on Taiwan by suggesting a break in U.S. policy toward the democratically self-ruled island, only to have aides jump in to say nothing had changed. This time, he was speaking alongside the Japanese prime minister in Tokyo during his first trip to Asia as commander-in-chief. The president was asked if the United States would get involved militarily in response to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan after declining to send troops to Ukraine to fight Russia's invasion. He said, yes, that's the commitment that we made. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin raised his voice when asked at a regular briefing about Biden's remarks. He said China has no room for compromise and concession on core concerns like Taiwan and will take firm action to safeguard its sovereignty and security interests. We do what we say. Biden, in his Monday remarks, stressed the U.S. remains committed to the bedrock one China policy, which recognizes the present rulers as the only legitimate government and acknowledges Beijing's claim that Taiwan is a part of the nation. But the president said that policy does not give China the right to forcefully take over the island. He says, we agree with the one China policy and all the attendant agreements we made, but the idea that it can be taken by force, just taken by force, would just not be appropriate. It would dislocate the entire region and would be another action similar to what happened in Ukraine. So it's a burden that is even stronger. He also played down the possibility China would try to take Taiwan. He says, my expectation is this will not happen. But Joe Biden's expectations count for nothing, considering that he also expected the Taliban would never take Afghanistan, which happened to be the case for approximately negative 37 seconds. And he also suggested that the Russians would probably not invade Ukraine, and then he suggested they would invade Ukraine, and then he suggested the Russians would fully take Ukraine, and then he suggested that we were going to beat them back. So Joe Biden's ability to predict things is extremely limited. And the man can't predict his own bowel movements at this point. Taiwan is thankful to the United States for its rock-solid commitment, according to Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Joanne Au. Responding to Biden's commitment, a White House official underscored the president's assertion that American policy toward Taiwan has not changed. The official said Biden was referring to the U.S. obligation to bolster Taipei's ability to defend itself, which is enshrined in the Taiwan Relations Act. That act, passed in 1979, portrays any attempt to determine Taiwan's political future through anything other than peaceful means as a threat to American interests. Congress is committed to selling defensive weapons to Taiwan, but Washington has previously avoided saying whether it would intervene directly in the event of an invasion. And again, he has said that in the past, like routinely, and then his team has to keep walking it back, which makes us look confused, and it makes it look as though we have no plan over there, which is, of course, not a good thing. Now, I will say for Joe Biden that it seems as though some of the moves that he is now making with regard to China are good. So he is traveling over to Asia, and he's doing what presidents of both parties have been attempting to do over the course of the last 10 years, maybe the only bipartisan policy in the United States at this point, and that is to try to hem in China by making alliances with the surrounding nations. According to the New York Times, Biden has enlisted a dozen Asia-Pacific nations to join a new loosely defined economic bloc meant to counter China's dominance and reassert American influence in the region 5 years after his predecessor withdrew the United States from a sweeping trade accord it had negotiated itself. The alliance will bring the United States together with Japan, South Korea, and India to establish new rules of commerce in the fastest growing part of the world and offer an alternative to Beijing's leadership. Wary of liberal opposition at home, Biden's new partnership will avoid the market access provisions of traditional trade deals, raising the question of how meaningful it will be. So again, if it's empty sort of stuff, then it really doesn't do anything. If it's just like, hey, we're all friends, isn't that great? You actually have to have a regional trade bloc that liberalizes the economic trading rules with these nations in order to create a counterincentive for them to join with the Chinese, who are a huge security threat on the border of all of these countries. Biden said, we're going to help all of the countries' economies grow faster and fairer. The president was sitting alongside Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, as well as Prime Fumio Kishida of Japan for the rollout of the initiative, while other leaders joined the event by video conference. This is, again, part of the Biden strategy to try to ring in China, which, again, is a good strategy, and it's been pursued by members of both parties. The New York Times tries to cover it as though Trump was not trying to do this. He was just doing it through bilateral trade agreements as opposed to through transnational trade agreements. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says it is by any account the most significant international economic engagement the United States has ever had in this region. The launch of it tomorrow in Tokyo marks an important turning point in restoring U.S. economic leadership in the region and presenting Indo-Pacific countries an alternative to China's approach to these critical issues. And again, I've spoken with top-level Democrats on this particular stuff. I've spoken with top-level Republicans. There is a widespread bipartisan consensus that there needs to be economic activity designed to counter rising Chinese influence, particularly the Belt and Road program in China, especially at a time of Chinese weakness. Now, China is not in strong economic position right now. They have massive outstanding debts. The Chinese economy is a bit of a mess, and it's been, when I say a bit, I mean a lot of a mess for a very long time. And they are sort of threatening to expand territorial holdings to counter the fact that they are in a bit of an economic mess. According to the Financial Times, China is intensifying its drive for influence in the Pacific by negotiating security deals with 2 additional island nations following a pact with the Solomon Islands, according to officials in the United States and allied countries. Beijing's talks with Kiribati, a Pacific island nation 3,000 kilometers from Hawaii, where U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is based, are the most advanced, the official said. They're in talks with Kiribati and at least one more Pacific island country over an agreement that would cover much of the same ground as that with the Solomon Islands, said an intelligence official from U.S. ally. The warning that Beijing is trying to further increase its clout in the Pacific came as Joe Biden began his visit to Asia amid regional concerns about China's push for influence. So, according to a leaked draft deal from March, the pact with the Solomon Islands could allow China to send its own police and military forces to the islands, a development that shocked the United States and its allies in the Indo-Pacific from Australia and New Zealand to Japan. And now they are setting their sights on Kiribati as well. So they're trying again to spread out their territorial footprint across the Pacific region. And the United States is trying to counter that. Now, this is a time, as I say, of economic weakness for the Chinese. So the fact that the Biden administration is pursuing more of an anti-China policy is a good thing. And again, maybe the only bipartisan part of the American political scene right now. Joe Biden, he's kind of, I think it's good. I think he's actually approaching a larger scale anti-China approach that is a good thing. And so, for example, yesterday, Joe Biden over the weekend, he said that our economy is growing at a faster rate than China. He's trying to prop up his own economic plans, but using China as the counter is not a terrible thing here.
Even in the face of historic economic challenges, our economy is providing and proving to be resilient. In fact, just yesterday, an independent analysis projected that the American economy is poised to grow at a faster rate than the Chinese economy for the first time in 45 years.
I mean, listen, it's painful to listen to the guy try to stumble out sentences, but by the same token, what he is saying in competition with China is not a bad thing. The reason that China, by the way, is failing is because China has embraced Joe Biden's policies to the fullest, meaning domestic subsidies and massive borrowing plans via huge spending. Right? So one of the weird things about the Biden administration is at the same time they're trying to counter rising Chinese influence in the Pacific, which is good. They're trying to create free trade blocs, which is good. And they're trying to make more overt security guarantees to Taiwan, which if they can back that up, all of that is good. They're trying to pursue bad economic policy at home that looks more like China. Article in the Wall Street Journal today pointing out that China spends an enormous amount of money on exactly the kind of stuff that the Biden administration likes. Quote, China spends much more in helping favored industries with state-directed funds, cheap loans, and other government incentives than other major economies, according to a new study expected to intensify the debate in Washington and elsewhere over Beijing's use of industrial policy. The study, to be published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies on Monday, finds that China's backing of its companies amounted to at least 1.73% of its gross domestic product in 2019, and that trend is continuing. In dollar terms, that's more than $248 billion based on market exchange rates, exceeding China's estimated military spending, or $407 billion based on exchange rates that adjust for different costs across countries. China's spending, both as a share of GDP and in dollar terms, is significantly higher than that of 7 other economies analyzed in the report, including South Korea, France, Germany, Japan, Taiwan, the U.S., and Brazil. The United States, by contrast, spent 0.39% of its GDP on industrial support in 2019. Oddly enough, people failed to see the connection between the fact that China has subsidized domestic industries to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars per year and the fact that China's economy is failing. They treat it as though we should imitate the Chinese. Well, maybe the reason China's economy sucks is because they keep redirecting money from what would be their most market-friendly uses and toward a bunch of stuff that the Chinese Politburo thinks would be a good idea. Beijing's disclosure of subsidies is murky at best, according to China's analysts. Its use of industrial policy is one of the most contentious issues involving the country's statist economic model. So isolating China, again, all of this is a good thing, maybe the only good thing the Biden administration is doing at this point, but that only works if there is some sort of predictable and reliable attempt to fulfill promises. And the Biden administration so far has been unable to do that in other parts of the world, although they have done a better job in Ukraine. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.